Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Spirit of EQ podcast. I'm Eric Pennington, and joining me is Jeff East. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, Eric, and everyone out there.
We are super excited today. We have with us Art Markman, and that's selfishly speaking, and that's also when you get to understand his background and the things that he's done, things he's involved in. I know you're going to feel that way too. But Art is the Annabelle Iron Worsham Centennial Professor of Psychology, Marketing, and Human Dimensions of Organization and Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. He's written over 150 research papers on topics including reasoning, decision-making, and motivation. Art brings insights from a cognitive science perspective to a broader audience through his blogs at Psychology Today and Fast Company. He has a podcast, Two Guys on Your Head. He's also the author of several books, including Smart Thinking, Smart Change, Brain Briefs, and Bring Your Brain to Work. All right, Art, I think I nailed that pretty well, did I not?
You stuck the landing there. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So to start with, I wanted to kind of delve a little bit into emotions and the role that they play in decision-making and thus what our potential outcomes are. And I know that in this time frame, and I almost want to say since the pandemic, we tend to be as a society a little bit more willing to talk about emotions. But could you talk a little bit about the role that they play and their impact on decision-making and outcomes?
Yeah, whenever I talk about emotion, I always like to, being a psychology professor, it's an occupational hazard, but I got to take a step back and just clarify where emotions come from.
Yes.
Because it's actually really crucial to understand that, to understand the influence that they play on decisions. So basically, we have this motivational system that engages the goals that we have and drives us to act. And that motivational system is evolutionarily really old. It involves brain systems buried deep inside the brain. And literally all of the great storytelling and thinking apparatus we have in the outer surface, that cortex of the brain, is built on top of all that old stuff. Mm-hmm. And so because it's built on top, all of that great storytelling apparatus, all that great thinking apparatus doesn't have really wonderful access to everything going on deep in the brain, which means that you can't really introspect and understand your own goals. Instead, your motivational system creates feelings that are basically reflections of how that motivational system is doing. And if you're doing well motivationally, you feel good. Doing poorly, you feel bad. And the more invested you are in that goal, the stronger the feeling. And then those feelings get turned into emotions when you analyze them, when you understand where they came from. So the reason that emotions influence decision making is because we have to be motivated to care about the things that we're choosing. Right? We don't choose anything dispassionately. We are engaged with the things. People don't say, I chose this because it was the best option. They say, I want this.
Yeah.
And when you say, I want this, that is a reflection that your motivational system is engaged. Or sometimes we say, I don't want this, right? I actually want to avoid this. And that's another reflection of motivational engagement. And so we have to understand that if you're not motivationally engaged, it's hard to make decisions. And consequently, you're going to have an emotional response to things. And that emotional response is providing you with information that is incredibly relevant to the choice that you're making.
Yeah, and that makes me think about my own personal journey, in this case with my wife of 32 years. This idea, it comes to me, the times where I said something that, and I could tell that she didn't receive it well. She walks away, and I'm going, could I just have that back? And to your point, Art, I wanted her to understand where I was coming from. I didn't deliver it well, so now I'm starting to feel, okay, I'm a little apprehensive now because I think I've hurt her feelings, those kind of things. That's one small example. Is that kind of like what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens there is, when you say something and it hurts somebody else, or you can feel like it didn't really land the way you wanted it to. Now you've created a negative situation which you didn't want to create, and you wanna fix that. So now you engage your motivational system engages what's called the avoidance system, because you've got a threat out there in the world. In this case, the threat that your wife is going to be upset and upset at you, and so you want to avoid that threat, and so you're going to take steps to try to repair that. But what's going to happen is you're going to experience the avoidance emotions, which are stress and fear and anxiety, and really, that what those do is to alert you there's a potential calamity out there, and I've got to do something about it.
Do you believe the more engaged we are with those emotions, the better we are at sort of that decision-making process? Or is that a up for debate thing?
Well, I would say the answer to every hard question in psychology is it depends. And I think it is important to recognize that we engage our motivational system in decision making, and a lot of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on whether my motivation in the moment is the best information for making that choice. So sometimes it is, right? So if I have to integrate a lot of information, particularly about people where I don't have a lot of words to describe that decision, then often the emotional response is providing really valuable information. But if you're the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company and you have lots of good spreadsheet data and projections about what's going to happen in the future, and those projections are based on models that are time-tested, those may be a better source of information in some of those decision situations than your own emotions are. Mm-hmm. And you should really, while you want to take into account, if you feel some trepidation about a decision, you want to take that into account and ask yourself why that is. You don't want to discount a lot of that other information in those really complex situations, because our motivational system, our emotions didn't really evolve to take into account the kinds of information that those really significant business decisions often require.
And looking at it also through the lens of we are in a very complex, rapidly changing world that we live in, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we have to recognize that the motivational system engages in the moment, which means it may not be a great predictor of what you're going to feel like tomorrow or next week. There's really fun evidence from a variety of places, including some work Danny Kahneman did, that if I choose the flavor of ice cream I'm going to want tomorrow, I might be wrong.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that type of analogy, because I used my wife as an example earlier, and there have been times where I thought that I stepped over a line, and then I found out maybe 5 minutes later when I went to get to sort of gauge the pressure gauge, that kind of thing. And she's like, "Oh, I'm fine. Why? What's wrong?" And then you go back and you go, oh, but in that moment, right?
Yeah.
I thought this is big. I blew it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's so interesting and how you said that. Little bit about, and maybe this connects to a degree. I've been trying to shift my terminology from mental health to mental fitness, and some of that is an ode to Simon Sinek and the things I've heard from him. But when you look at the United States at a high level from your vantage point, how would you say we're doing in that regard? That as it relates.
It's interesting. I mean, I think we're on a journey as a country.
Mm-hmm.
So 30 years ago, it was very difficult to talk about any issues relating to mental health and wellness at all.
Right.
Physical health we could sort of deal with, but mental health not so much. And I think what, for a variety of reasons, we began to have those conversations to talk about. First, mental illness, but more than that, for just everyday mental health that people are dealing with, and I think we have gotten good at recognizing when we're stressed, when we're anxious, when we're feeling sad, or perhaps even verging into depression. So I do think we are better at talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The next step in that journey is really to engage in routine practices that promote mental health and mental wellness, and that's a place where we're not quite as good, which frankly mirrors a lot of our long-term health practices. We are as a nation not particularly good at exercising regularly, at eating well regularly, at avoiding some of the substances that maybe we ought to stay away from, and so it's no surprise that when you think about some of the behaviors that can promote mental wellness, that we're not always good at those either. And some of them are actual physical health kinds of things. I mean, getting out and exercising turns out to be a great way to promote mental health as well. And so, that physical activity matters. But, there's also, practices involving a lot of reframing of what's happening in your life. The wonderful thing about being human is that we have a remarkable capacity to reframe a lot of the things that have gone on around us. And so, do I choose to be angry at the driver in front of me, or do I look at that and think, well, maybe that driver's having a bad day, or maybe there's something going on with the car in front of them that I didn't see. And so, giving a little bit of that grace to somebody else that in turn lowers your own energy levels around things. And those practices are learnable, but they're not in as wide use as maybe we'd like them to be.
It's funny how many times have we used that example of the person in the car in front of you.
Yeah, the cutting off in traffic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got a question going back a little bit. You mentioned that the mental fitness, mental whatever we want to call it, is people are more aware of it. Why do you think that change is happening, that people are paying more attention to that?
I think there are several reasons why people are paying more attention now. One is that the psychology community has been more active over the last 25 years in bringing information about the science of psychology and the science of mental wellness to the forefront. And thankfully, a variety of publications seem interested in providing outlets for that. I've had the privilege of writing for Fast Company on a weekly column for Fast Company online for almost 10 years now. And, that's the sort of thing that, in the 90s, every article in a business magazine involved somebody, usually a man in a suit, doing something like arbitrage. and success was about the money. And I think that when you look at those same magazines now, there's much more of a recognition about the integration of that work into the rest of your life, and that recognition that you can't be pedal to the metal 24/7, 365, and that there's more to life than just the size of your bank account. And I think that when that becomes part of the public conversation, it influences the way people think about themselves.
It's interesting, Jeff, and how you brought that up. And Art, as you were unwrapping that, I'm thinking about our access to information in 2023 is so much greater than what it was back in the 90s, right? So in some senses, having access to the information now allows people to kind of go, oh, well, that's a great point. I realize, right, that there's still some folks that are struggling with embracing that. I mean, exercise is a great one, which I want to return to in a minute, but it really is a big positive. I mean, there's many things online that I'm not a big fan of, but I cannot deny that this opening up of the information so that those in the psychology community and other places that can speak to these things that really are really beneficial.
What we're doing right now.
Yeah. The podcast realm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who would have thought, right? I mean, right. I'm thinking.
No, I mean, you used to have to be lucky enough to be able to get on a radio station.
Yeah.
And now we have the opportunity to provide content for people who need it, when they need it, where they need it, and that information can persist as well. So it's not as ephemeral as a radio broadcast used to be, where you'd say, well, did you hear that show that somebody did? And you'd be like, no, I missed it. Oh, well, it's gone.
Right. And it's so fascinating. And this would have been around this probably would have been 2006, 2007. And I don't think internet radio really ever got any strong footing to do anything, because I think, quite frankly, at least in my opinion, that it morphed into podcasting. But I used to have an internet radio show, and as we were talking, I'm just thinking about how clunky and difficult it was to pull off this thing, because I would try to have guests on just like a podcast, but obviously the internet then was not the the bandwidth, and oh my gosh. But here's to the big positive of that. If we could, Art, I want to go back to that exercise thing again, because it seems like I'm seeing on a weekly basis new articles about research about exercise and its impact on mental health, mental fitness, as I call it. And again, maybe it's that sort of, it takes time for this stuff to really, to stick. But would you say that the research is pretty conclusive now, that we can say if we exercise, it will help? And maybe,
yeah, I think there's no question on that score, and I think it's true both in the short term and the long term.
Okay.
In the short term, it is a great way of boosting your mood, getting outside, getting into the sunlight, getting a little bit bodily movement. The brain is a critical part of controlling the body. And so when you get out and move around and exercise, it directs your attention towards that movement, which can often break a cycle of rumination. Rumination is, from the word ruminant, an animal that chews its cud. Rumination is all about chewing over those negative thoughts when you're experiencing some anxiety or depression.
You're talking dairy farmer. Right?
You're talking to an old dairy farmer.
There you go. And so, getting out can break that cycle in the short term. And then in the long term, physical health, I mean, the brain's part of the body. If the body is healthy, you are much more likely to experience good brain health as well. And the healthier your brain, the less likely you are to, in the long run, to suffer microstrokes, to suffer other things that can cause the little bits of brain damage that can ultimately lead to dementia. So there's no downside to getting out and moving. and a tremendous amount of upside.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. And I got to thinking, when it comes to this idea of, we were talking about information and being able to, people now have access to it. Do you believe, Art, that, because it's easy for me, and I'm just saying this personally, perspective wise, and I have no data to back myself up here, but it seems to me like we're getting more and more obese. We're getting more and more sedentary. And that's an easy path. Reframing, I can kind of look at it through the lens of going, well, what's the time frame that it takes for people to get new information and then to move to action, result, that kind of thing? What are some thoughts on that?
I think that part of the problem we have now is just that behavior change is hard.
Yeah.
And human behavior is strongly biased towards the thing that feels good in the moment. And so eating a really good meal, that feels awfully good.
Yeah.
And rigorous exercise doesn't feel good on day one. And it certainly doesn't feel good on day two after day one when your entire body is sore.
Yeah.
So, it's a matter of developing a set of routines that pay off more in the long run than they do in the short run, particularly early on. And that's difficult. I like to point out that if you look at the 10 Commandments, right, in the Bible, you can excise a couple of them that have to do with follow this religion rather than that one,
mm-hmm.
and all the rest of them are about do the thing that's right in the long run, not the thing that's right in the short run. So that person who just annoyed you, don't kill him.
Right.
That very pretty thing somebody else owns, don't steal it. And the very attractive person married to your neighbor, leave him or her alone. And those are on the list, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. The list doesn't say breathe. It doesn't say eat 3 meals a day, right? Those are easy. It's really the hard ones. And I do like to point out that on top of all that, that list is kind of a failure in the sense that humanity does all the stuff that's on there. So, I usually go on to say that if you're in the business of trying to influence people's behavior, you should bear in mind that it's not the message. Because that 10 Commandments, that was published in the best-selling book of all time, and it failed.
Yeah.
Right. So God can't come down and tell you to do something and have you listen. What makes any of the rest of us think that you're going to tell something to somebody and that's going to be the thing that changes their behavior?
That is, wow, that's a money quote, Art, for sure. And
heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's actually, I think about this. We were talking about it before recording, before you came on, about the re-recorded disclaimer at the end of our podcast. The idea of, hey, just want you to understand this is for educational purposes, not intended to do blah, 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 blah. And we were talking about the importance of that. And then we got into talking about my wife. I love my wife. You probably could already figure this out, Art, as many times as I mentioned her. But she has some podcasts that she listens to from a number of naturopaths and wellness coaches, and some that are alternative in how they practice. And sometimes I don't know if they probably could use what you just said, because I think they utter things so unequivocal, right?
Yeah.
It's just so dogmatic, maybe is a better way of saying it. And I'm going, but you can't know that for sure. Shouldn't you be a little more cautious about those absolute statements, right?
Yeah.
But I think what can happen in this influence business, we believe in it so much, we think it's worked so well for us, so therefore it would work for everyone, and then we go with it. But yeah, that's profound. Do you, as it relates, because I know with your podcast, you're dispensing things of offering of help and change, right, to a degree?
We really just try to help people to understand the underlying psychology of things, right? So for example, we talk often about how there's tremendous power in things like reframing a situation, but we're also very clear as often as we can that if you're persistently anxious and depressed, talk to a professional.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to reframe yourself out of clinical depression. Some of these things will help as part of the balanced breakfast that can be part of mental wellness, mental fitness. But sometimes you're in a situation where engaging with the medical community is also really important.
Yeah, and it's okay, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
more
think
than okay.
Yeah, exactly.
If you listen, I felt a little over a year ago, July of 2022, I had a bike wreck and shattered my pelvis.
Oh.
And I spent a week in the hospital, had a titanium plate put in, but thankfully a year later, with the help of the surgeon and my great physical therapy team, a year later I was able to run a half marathon. So all's well.
Awesome.
But there was no shame in having a surgeon put a plate in my hip, right? We wouldn't, and no one would say, I can't believe you did that. They're like, yeah, of course, you had a shattered pelvis, get that thing fixed. One of the things that I really appreciated in the week that I spent in the hospital was, so on the second day, they got me sitting up, and I was so excited to be sitting up. I sat in on a Zoom meeting at work, with the camera off because I looked terrible.
Right.
And that hour and a half was way too long for me to be sitting up at that point in my recovery. And I spent the rest of the day asleep, and I missed my afternoon physical therapy appointment. And the following morning, I felt horrible. I mean, just down in the day. And the physician on the floor who came by said, "How are you doing today?" I said, to be honest, I'm feeling pretty down this morning. And they immediately launched into all of the mental health resources that were available in the hospital. If I wanted to talk to somebody, if there's any, and I stopped them and I said, listen, I'm a psychologist and I think I know what I'm doing right now. And I think I understand why I'm feeling down, that I kind of overdid it yesterday. I said, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate that your immediate response to what I said was to let me know the variety of medical resources that were available in this situation. It is so important that we treat mental health as health and that we provide immediately the same level of resources that we would for people who might be suffering from anxiety or depression as we do for somebody who might have shattered a pelvis.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, this is nothing new to the listeners, but I've struggled with panic attacks and anxiety that just came out of nowhere. But part of the problem is I don't think the people that have experienced it and have made themselves well talk about it.
Yeah.
And share.
You're right.
I look at it as if I got through this and am able to function as normally as I can function, if I don't share it, that's kind of meaningless almost.
Yeah.
Well, and I would
it's visible without you sharing it.
Yeah. I got to say, Art, too, and I'm not a big analytics guy, but that episode was probably one of our most downloaded episodes when we tackled Jeff's anxiety. And I think about it too, Jeff. We want our audience to feel that there's this source of you're not alone, right? Because I think oftentimes people can get in that mode of like, I'm the only one that's ever experienced a bike wreck. I'm the only person who experienced anxiety. Well, if you really take a step back, come on. Probably
by
a lot
the
of
way,
people.
as soon as you tell somebody you've had a bike wreck, they usually have like 12 other people that they know who've had one, which is partly a testimony to how dangerous bikes are. But that's a whole other.
And I don't know what you were doing, but there's a lady that is a friend of ours that she was in a triathlon and she got clipped and lost her balance and went right straight into like a pole and a hill. It was just, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I was just riding and
Wow.
caught a funny stretch of road, and caught a little lip of pavement between a sort of area of rough and smooth pavement, and my bike just went straight over
Well,
before I could react.
Wow.
add 100 horsepower motor to it, and you end up with an ankle like mine.
Yeah. Well, I was doing 18 miles an hour at that point. And you know
Well,
what? The human body is not really designed to.
I was doing 3.
Wow.
So, Art, I have one last thing around the mental fitness. Our audience, you've given them some good insight. We talked a little bit about exercise and about reframing, seeking out the help of the medical community. Is there anything else you would add if somebody says, "So, what else could I do to help it?"
I'm a big believer that about once a year, it's good to take a step back and look at your life and ask, what am I systematically failing to do? We're all going to fail at little things now and again. That's life, or what the kids call adulting, right?
Right.
You're gonna have little things that don't go well. But if there's something that's significant to you that you're systematically not achieving, and it might be a goal in your life, but it might just be an emotional tone. You might feel like, I'm just consistently not feeling satisfied, or I'm not feeling joy. Take note of that, because that's your canary in the coal mine. That's the thing that tells you that if you don't explicitly make some change in your life, then that isn't going to change. And so that's the point at which you really need to take that step back and say, all right, if I want to experience more joy and satisfaction, for example, what are the activities that bring me joy and satisfaction? Am I not spending enough time with other people? We know that social interactions are a huge driver of that. Is my job no longer as satisfying as it was? What is it that's keeping me from that? And then really working and enlisting the help of the people in your life to bring more of those activities into your day, into your week, so that you do have those chances. And I think we often don't do that reflection. We at best we kind of haphazardly make New Year's resolutions, and nobody really prepares for them, right? You say, oh, we're going to make a New Year's resolution, and on like December 31st or January 1st, you're like, sure, and you throw something out there,
Right.
as opposed to really going through a little bit of a period of reflection and thinking about how life is going, and then not just committing in a yes, I'm going to do this, but really being much more mindful about how am I going to do this? Who am I going to enlist to help me? I think that exercise is incredibly important to do, and one where the opportunity to do it will just keep slipping by if you don't make a concerted effort.
Yeah. On an upcoming episode, we've got a gentleman who he's just so inspiring. He's in his mid-40s, played baseball when he was a kid, up through high school, and then that was sort of the parting. And then at mid-40s, man, I'd like to play baseball again. And obviously he wasn't going to the Baltimore Orioles for a tryout, but he found a local league of other age guys, and he joined the baseball team, started playing, and he told me, it's going to be in the recording, he said it was really like Field of Dreams when Shoeless Joe Jackson was out in the field, the feeling of joy and awe. And I'm thinking to myself, and he's very thoughtful, so he recognized this is something that brings energy to me.
Yeah.
And he chose it. And I said, I'm so inspired because, many at that age might just say, hey, I can't play baseball. I did that when I was in high school. That doesn't work anymore. And then you got to go, well, why won't it work anymore? Why can't you? I mean, especially when it's going to deliver that kind of return on investment,
Oh, yeah. No, that's wonderful.
So
that's fantastic. Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot here. Jeff had something he wanted to ask you as well.
We've talked about this a little bit already about change, but especially in the workplace, there's so much happening. Work from home, hybrid. You have to come into the office. Companies merging, downsizing, and everything else. What are your thoughts about navigating that kind of change? These things that are just hitting us, you can't avoid them.
Yeah. So the human mind likes some degree of predictability. We don't like everything to be exactly predictable, but we like each day to be a bit of a variation on a theme. So we more or less want to know what's going to happen next. And I think that when things get chaotic, that creates a lot of anxiety for people. That uncertainty creates a certain amount of stress. And so I think that a lot of the things you were just describing and a lot of what's happened since March of 2020 has created a lot of unpredictability that has been difficult for people. And I think that in those situations, it is important to find your islands of stability. Mm-hmm. So it's if your work situation is going to be chaotic. Maybe you're working for a company that's undergoing some problems, and so your job function is going to be changing, or there might even be a threat of layoffs. If you're shifting back and forth between working from home and working from the office, I mean those kinds of bits of unpredictability need to be layered with some elements of predictability, and that might be digging into some of your close personal relationships and solidifying those so that you have important people in your life. It might be activities that you engage in, so putting those on your schedule. So having a group of friends that you get together with on Thursday nights, or a hobby that you engage in where you have a group that gets together. But building in those elements of stability is a great way of having anchor points so that listen, I can hang on through this because I know Thursday's coming, I'm going to see my friends, or I know I'm going to be have this opportunity to spend time on Saturday doing something I really enjoy, or whatever it is. That's I think incredibly important so that your entire life doesn't feel like it's swirling in chaos.
The things you mentioned, but could you also dwell on would it help to pay attention to the parts of your job that are staying the same?
If they're there, absolutely. So again, as we were talking about earlier, we have a remarkable capacity to reframe. We also have a remarkable capacity to choose what we're paying attention to. And sometimes the negatives call out to themselves in ways that lead us to forget the good things that are happening. And so it's useful. One of the things I do, this is an audio podcast, so you can't see this, but behind me, I have some thank you notes that people have sent me that I put up on my bulletin board. And if I do something that somebody chooses to write me a note about, I put the note up on my little bulletin board. And on those days when I'm feeling unsettled, I'll take a look. I'll pull something down. I will remind myself that there are things I've done that other people appreciated that are part of my work life. And some of those things that are going to fade to the background, bringing those back to the front is I think really important. Life is almost never all one thing. It's almost never all good or all bad. But when you're feeling good, everything feels good, right? Everything's coming up roses, right? But and when things feel bad, it's almost as if you think everything is bad. And so part of the way to break that cycle is to remind yourself of the stuff that's actually not just fine, but maybe even quite good.
Okay, I would throw out in light of your questions, Jeff. And I hear this. I think I hear this from you, Art, is this underlying sort of idea of intentionality. And I know for myself, when the pace is running at such a clip that it feels like I'm just moving to the next thing, to finish the next thing, to finish the next thing. And I caught myself this morning in my closet as I'm getting ready. And it was like, man, I am really fortunate to be able to do the work that I do. I'm because I've had times in my life where I was crawling and I was scratching and knocking hard and please give me a shot. And that was really tough. And though that doesn't mean I'll never have tough again, I can intentionally focus in on, man, I get to do this. And I sometimes think, Jeff, in those situations in work, that very few people are going to be able to call the CEO of JP Morgan Chase and say, okay, change the work policy. But, maybe no one, right? So what you have is what you have, and maybe being able to intentionally embrace the gratitude. I guess that's what I'm thinking. But great points. Okay, as always, we seem to be on the time crunch, but I wanted to get this in, Art. What's something you're excited about right now in the current frame?
So I have been lucky enough for the last couple of years to serve as our vice provost for academic affairs here at the university, and I love embracing challenges of different kinds. And there's two of them that we're dealing with at the university that I'm actually quite excited about, and they're interrelated. The first is that exiting the pandemic, I think a lot of our students were feeling demoralized. They lost a couple of years of real important education time to having to do all of their schooling online, and so they didn't lose them, but they didn't have all the social interactions that they may have wanted. There were reduced numbers of activities and things like that, and so one of the things we did this year at the university was we released a new honor code. And it's focused on an ideal. There's an operative phrase in the middle of our new honor code that says we're going to engage in the intentional pursuit of learning and scholarship. And the idea there is not to focus on don't do the wrong thing, but rather to create the basis for a reminder of why we're here, and to create conversations about why we engage in higher education. And related to that, last year you couldn't have escaped that a large language model, ChatGPT, got released, and everyone immediately started citing gloom and doom for education because somebody could just type in a prompt and get an essay written. But I look at this and think, what a great opportunity to rethink the way that we teach some skills like writing. Are there going to be ways that we can use these new tools to be better at teaching skills that were historically very difficult for people to catch on to? And so I see tremendous opportunities all over. Even though there are some headwinds, I'm just incredibly excited about where higher education is. I've been very fortunate. This is my beginning of my 33rd year on the faculty somewhere, so it's been great fun, and the fact that I've been able to work in administration now and really try to influence the direction of our academic mission has just been wonderful, and I'm having a great time.
You know what, Art? It's I applaud that slogan term. You're about the intentional pursuit thing, right? And I'm not going to get it all because I don't have it in my memory, but one of the things I love for that, what I hear is a calling to rise to a higher standard in pursuit, right? And I think no one gets out of an episode of the Spirit of EQ podcast without some kind of musical reference. And Jeff knows this, and Brett. But
it's usually about Rush.
Okay, but not this time. This time, it's about one of my favorite producers of all time, Trevor Horn. And for the audience, if you remember the Buggles, video killed the radio star. That's what he's probably most famous for. But he's much more of a career in producing. So he's releasing this new album of a compilation of older songs that are being reimagined. And he has Seal singing on a remake of Joe Jackson's Steppin' Out.
Ooh, love that song.
And it is, I love it. I love it. But here's what's interesting. It's done in Dolby Atmos, right, along with high res. and the things that you can hear, just these little nuances that they throw in that just take what that song was in the beginning and kind of, it moves it to a different place. And when I heard you say that, I immediately went to that song. It's like, yeah, it's just like that background vocalist at the end who just, it's a background echo and a melody. And I'm going, that made that absolutely made that. And I think I'm one of these optimists that I believe that if you call people to this higher thing, there's a number of people that will rise to that. You know, that's really inspiring, Art. Oh my gosh!
Can I just add? Can I add?
Yo,
one
please,
thing?
yeah.
Because I know I love what you're just saying, and I, and of course I agree with you that all those little touches matter so much. But it's not just that when you call people to the occasion that many of them will rise, but that we spend so much of our time worried that somebody somewhere might be getting away with something that we don't create opportunities for people to step up and rise to the occasion. And you know what? At some point, maybe what we need to do is to focus on those people who are willing to embrace the challenges in front of them and not spend so much time trying to make sure that there's nobody who does the wrong thing.
Wow.
That.
I like that. That's really, really good. Really, really good. Art, I really appreciate your time and joining us today. It was awesome. Loved your insights, and we'll consider this. You'll have an invite back when we've got some, when you have more time, and we'd love to do it. And there will be show notes with all of the things that we've discussed as it relates to Art's work. And with that, we come to a close. We appreciate your time and look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish. And we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.